traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's after hours. Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
With a look at your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Clear tonight, patchy fog late with a low of 60, then Tuesday sunshine with a high of 81. If you need new windows, doors, or more, choose 952 Windows. They offer top-tier quality, unbeatable warranties, and Energy Star's most efficient ratings. Get started today at 952windows.com. That's 952windows.com.
Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much. Happy Monday to everybody. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Some point down the road here, I will have to share my weekend because it was very paranormal induced and there was a lot of paranormal activity. I did a private investigation on Friday night that we got some really incredible stuff that I have that I've been talking with who we did the investigation with, and I think that we might be able to share some of the recordings and stuff down the road. And also Saturday, we did a CE5 experiment. Remember, folks, that is the close encounter of the fifth kind of experiment, trying to bring forth any sort of aliens or anything else. That's how I spend my weekends. And it was something else. Let's just put it that way. So down the road, we will definitely be talking about that. And I'm really excited because I do believe that the people that I was with are going to be okay with sharing that information. As you know, as a paranormal investigator, you don't share anything unless you get the permission of the people who you do the investigation with or at the location or all that good stuff. So we're just kind of working through that, listening to audio and stuff. And once I have that, we'll be able to do that. Once again, I hope everyone had a great weekend. I'm excited today because we have with us, we've had Tim Rayborn on a few times already. You might remember we had Tim on back in December when we talked about the scary book of Christmas lore, 50 terrifying Yuletide tales from around the world. You remember that? And then we just more recently had him talk about the not nightmare-inducing, a history of the end of the world, over 75 tales of Armageddon and global extinction, from ancient beliefs to prophecies and scientific predictions. Those are just two of the number of books that he's written. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something where we don't end in disaster. At least I don't think so. kind of, well, it wouldn't be a Tim Rayborn book if we survived it at the end of it. We're tonight, his newest book, literally brand new, Northern Mythology, Tales from the Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions. That literally just was released last week. And I'll tell you, and for those of you who are not on the Facebook live stream, I have the book in my hand right now. If you want to come and watch this live stream and looking at this book, it is nothing but beautiful. It truly is amazing. Tim, welcome to GhostBox Radio. I almost forgot that to include you in all this.
That's fine.
Look at this
You can
book.
just talk. I'll just sit here and nod and smile. That's great.
Yeah, like, oh, that's right. Tim's here. Oh, hi, Tim.
No, it's great. Thank you so much. It's always really fun to come on. I really like talking to us.
because you really never know what you're going to get, isn't it? So first of all, this, like I said, this book, let's just talk about it, not even from the content that you've written, just even, we always say that like buying a book, you're buying it with your eyes, first of all, perhaps, if you don't know the author or anything else. Tim, you must have, when you saw this, you must have been like, holy, you know what?
Yes. I had seen some of the interior artwork and such, and I knew the front cover, but I hadn't seen the whole thing. So it was news to me when I saw this beautiful sort of gold stamped front and all of these pictures, like limited color palette, but it really works well. So I was very impressed. Yeah, it's a real lovely kind of keepsake for anybody that's interested in these stories. You're getting a real quality product as well. So yeah.
You really are. And, I think the one thing that I find really exciting about this too is, we talked a little bit before going on the air. I do a great deal of Kindle, and partially because when I'm trying to read the books for the show, it just makes more sense. And people will send me PDFs so I can add to Kindle and stuff.
Sure.
But then you look at a book like this, and it's easy to be reminded why the physical book that you have in your hand is such a wonderful piece. And it's like we don't want that to become a lost art. And I noticed that this is available as hardback only, and then as an audiobook. Is that how it's going to stay?
Yeah, I think so. Audiobook's coming later. I think it'll be out in October. I don't think they finished recording it yet. This particular publisher, Suddermill Press, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, they don't normally do Kindle and ebook, as far as I know, at least not for things like this. So that's just the way it is. It's either audio or hardback. But audiobooks are always fun. But this would be a great thing to listen to if you're driving in the car. But this is the kind of book that's really nice to hold in your hands and just experience and take the time to sift through. So I think that the best format for it really is just the good old-fashioned book form.
Well, and then for us in Minnesota, Northern Mythology, Tales from the Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions. I mean, that is right up our alley up here. Yeah. Something like this, I would assume that this isn't one of those type of books. They're like, Tim, we want you to write about this. Oh, okay, I'll look into it. You had to have had a love for this.
Yeah, this was a thing I proposed to them, and they actually happily accepted. So yeah, it's been a topic I've been very interested in for a long time. The sort of, we might call it the greater Germanic mythologies, which would be like Germany, Anglo-Saxon, Norse, Scandinavian, but also Finnish in this case as well, and how they were present not only in Scandinavia but also rolled over into England as well. So yeah. The entire northern tradition, but also the places like Orkney and the northern islands off of Scotland, and also, of course, Iceland, which is where the vast majority of these Norse mythology stories come from. It's actually from when they were written down in the 13th century in Iceland.
Is that all? No, I'm just kidding. I mean, where do you start? Where do you start putting this, assembling this book?
Well, we're very fortunate in a couple of ways, is that both the Northern and the Finnish traditions were meticulously written down. As I say, the Norse myths that we have come from two sources primarily, and they're both from Iceland, from between about 1200 and 1240, those years. They were written down by literate Christians that still had an interest in preserving the old pre-Christian pagan religious stories and stuff, the stories and myths and tales and such. And so they wrote them down. That the larger collection is called the Edda, and there's a poetic Edda, which is a collection of old lengthy epic poems, and then there's the prose Edda, which was written by an Icelandic lawyer named Snorri Sturluson, who took and collected. And so these were copied and preserved and kept alive down the centuries in various. They were actually written in Icelandic originally, not Latin, not some other language. So they were very carefully preserved, and we've lost some of them certainly over time. But
Sure.
these particular people felt there was great value in preserving these stories, and these are really some of the only stories we have. Like, we don't really know. We know that when the Icelanders, when the people first came to Iceland in the later 9th century, they brought these beliefs with them, but a lot of times they didn't write them down until much later. They didn't have the literacy to do it. So these what these tell us about is the sort of pagan and mythological life and beliefs of Iceland from about 900 to 1000. They don't really tell us much about Sweden or Norway, although we presume that there are overlaps because we see references in carved figurines and in things, runes carved on stones and stuff that allude to these stories, or images and pictures and such that seem to be also illustrating these stories. So we can assume that there was a lot of overlap, but there were also probably a lot of regional differences. What was known in Iceland in, say, the year 950 probably wasn't exactly the same as what was in Norway 50 years earlier, or Sweden 50 years before that. So, but it's all we have. There's a professor of Old Norse and his name is Jackson Crawford. He lives out in Colorado, and he made a really good analogy that what we have as terms of these myths as if there was a ship that had a bunch of treasure chests on it, and they were all filled with scrolls and details and books, and somewhere along the way that ship had a shipwreck and sank, and one chest sort of floated to the shore, and that's what we have. The Icelandic ones are the ones that survive. Everything else sank, and we don't have them. We're extremely lucky to have these at all. So the beginning point for writing a book like this is to consult the original text in translation. I don't read medieval Icelandic, but yeah, that's where you start to answer your question. And with Finnish mythology, it's the same. In the early 19th century, as Finland was undergoing a sort of revival of its nationalism and trying to break free of Swedish control, several people went around and started collecting the old folk tales and myths and beliefs from villages all over Sweden, and they wrote them down in a collection which later came to be known as the Kalevala, and that's where I've drawn those from. And that dates from 1820s, 1830s. So we're lucky that there were these sort of folklorists and archivists that actually took the time to write these down so that they didn't just pass on into oral legend and then disappear. But that's very definitely, oral tradition is very definitely their origin.
And I've often the idea of oral tradition actually to me is very scary. I mean, the idea of getting it right, not we all know what telephone is like, playing the game. Do you feel like, I mean, obviously, how do we know? But do you feel like it's that it stayed pretty accurate through the generations?
We don't know. We have really no way of knowing. I suspect that, like the Norse myths, we know that there are different branches and there are different versions of these stories very clearly. There's for instance, there's a particular story in the Edda, an Icelandic myth that concerns Loki, and part of it seems to actually borrow from Celtic Irish tradition. There's a very similar story from Ireland. And the reason for that might well have been simply that there were a number of Irish, the Norse also settled in Ireland, and then some of them later moved to Iceland. So maybe they knew that story when they took it with them to Iceland, and it got blended with theirs, but that particular version of that myth probably never existed in Norway. So, there's constant change. And I think that's the nature of oral tradition anyway, is that it's more that was it Joseph Campbell I remember, it was a wonderful quote, and I'm paraphrasing. He said that a myth is something that never happened, but which is always happening. And that's a great way of looking at it. It's something that's always happening. So the myth is constantly evolving and changing, but the underlying truth of it remains. And I think that's what you have when you're dealing with oral traditions, whether it's music, whether it's poetry, whether it's stories, they're going to change. It's only when we write them down that they kind of become, firm and whatever. So, yeah.
But you're starting at point A and getting to the end, whatever the last point is. It just might be what's in between might have gone through some sort of change over the course of that makes sense. And I also like the idea too of like figurines or the imagery and stuff that helps with that as well.
Absolutely. And sometimes you have imagery that contradicts the surviving myths. So clearly that's evidence that there was an alternative version of it that didn't get written down somewhere. That happens. Or you'll have folk tales and fairy tales that have multiple different versions. There's, people that are really into studying fairy tales, for instance, can find versions of some of these stories all across Europe and even into Central Asia and such. And they're sometimes very similar, sometimes they're very different. That's the nature of story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that has to excite you.
Yeah,
that's not something where like, oh, for God's sake, I just got through. It's more like, I'm sure this is much more like, ooh, what do we have here?
Yeah, it's very fascinating to sort of look at differences and see how things evolve. It's like language itself, when you're looking at all the languages and you'll see, well, German's related to Dutch, but it's also related to Danish, and Danish and Norwegian are almost identical in the way that they're written, but they're pronounced very differently. So there's like family trees of these sorts of things, and it's true of stories as well as languages and music and every other human endeavor, really. Yeah,
that's fantastic. We are talking with Tim Rayborn. We're talking about his newest book, just released, available on Amazon. If you want to support me with some Amazon stuff, I'm putting it up on my website, GhostBoxRadio.com. Northern Mythology, Tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions. We're going to the comments section, and Chuck asks a question. He says, how much of the folklore is local folklore, and how much is brought in folklore due to conquering?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think with these particular stories, it's pretty hard to say, actually. But I think it goes back to there was a very interesting point about that, because I'm of the belief that a lot of these particular beliefs and stories and folklore were very local. They actually were. They might be confined to a handful of villages or a small region. They didn't have counties then, but something like that. Whereas you go 30, 40 miles away, they might have a very different version of the same the same gods, the same myths might be somewhat different. So it's, as I say, what we have with these particular stories is what was known in Iceland at the time, and that's all we have. So, but certainly a lot of it was local, a lot of it was lost, absolutely, because of those reasons. There was no one standard when we talk about that. There was no, there wasn't like a unified, a unified Bible of these stories by any means. There was no, that wasn't even a concept that existed. So, yeah.
Well, and I would assume if something is folklore is brought in due to conquering, it's always generally the winners that write history anyway. Whether it's
interesting though, because you often find that the conquerors end up absorbing a lot of the local myths as well. I think one of the most dramatic examples of that people like to point out is Rome and Greece. Rome conquered Greece, but Rome adopted Greek civilization's way of living and their gods and so much of their ideas and philosophies and such. So it's often the case that the more culturally influential of the two will influence regardless of which one is the conquering one. So, and that's not always true. If you have like Christianity and missionary religions will come in and try to beat things out of people, absolutely. But but even there, sometimes there are instances of things like that. When you look at Anglo-Saxon England in the 6th, 7th centuries, when the Christian Catholic Church was trying to convert them, and one of the popes even said, basically, when preaching Christianity, go easy on them and try to find a way to bring their beliefs into ours as well. So instead of making an offering to a well to a god, we could call that well the home of a particular Catholic saint, and people could keep right on doing it. But they're just changing the name of it. It isn't a god, or it isn't a spirit. It's now a saint. So there's often this sort of case where the conquerors do have to adapt to what's there, because it's often very difficult to just force things onto people if they don't want them, especially if you're dealing with centuries of tradition.
That's that's interesting. I ask everyone to stick around with us because we need to take our first break. Damien, I see your question. We'll get to it after the break. We're talking with Tim Rayborn. We're talking about Northern Mythology, Tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions, his newest book. We're going to be talking a lot more about that. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Greg Bakun here. I love historic tours of Minneapolis and seeing everything it has to offer. But if you know me, I like to include a little spooky in my tours, which is why I found the perfect combination. Minneapolis Trolley Tours does this amazing candlelight ghost tour that you have to check out. It's an extremely immersive experience. It's a trolley trip that starts out at a haunted mansion, traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's After Hours, Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Twin Cities Con returns to the Minneapolis Convention Center for their 4th year, November 8th through 10th. Twin Cities Con is a celebration of comics, toys, TV, film, art, cosplay, games, and all things nerdy. It's also a family-friendly event where you can meet your favorite celebrities, browse the vendor hall and artist alley for the coolest merch, watch celebrity Q&A, and even more. Twin Cities Con is bigger and better than ever before, with guests like Anakin Skywalker himself, Hayden Christensen, Stephanie Beatrice from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Encanto, WWE Hall of Fame wrestler Sting, and Lou Diamond Phillips. Plus, your favorite voice actors. 3 days of action-packed fun in the heart of Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Convention Center. Tickets start at $25. Kids tickets are just $8 for the entire weekend. VIP tickets also available, including some really cool VIP perks. Don't wait to get your tickets because early bird pricing is for a limited time. Buy your tickets and get more information at TwinCitiesCon.com. Gritty Gear Company is a great place to go for clothing that is fun and expressive. But did you know we also do custom orders on demand? We've worked with all types of companies and organizations, from first responders to even a certain radio station. Our team is here to help you look amazing. Our clothing is of the highest quality, and you will love your logo on the finished product. We are a locally owned small business who simply wants you to look great. Find out more at grittygearcompany.com. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
And join me Sunday in Rochester. I am going to be out there over at Refined Divine Psychic Holistic Healing Fair. I am one of the guest speakers. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be talking about ITC, intertransmental communication. I think I might be talking a little bit about trying to reach out to aliens. I'm going to be playing some recordings that I have. We're just going to kind of go through a lot of stuff. We're going to have a table there. Come on out to say hi. It's 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Eagles Club. That's 917 15th Avenue Southeast in Rochester. There's going to be free gift bags to the first 40 people. Come early. I know this is going to be a very busy day. Psychic Medium, Refined Divine, she's going to be doing a gallery at noon. You do not want to miss that. And then I'm going to be speaking at 1:30. And then there's a lot of other great speakers throughout the day. I am very excited about it. I'm very grateful to be included. So thank you very much for that. And also, you may have just heard Twin Cities Con is coming back to the Twin Cities, which would make sense since it's called Twin Cities Con after all. That's November 8th through 10th, and we're going to have a table there this year, which I am really excited about. And tickets are on sale now. You can get the early bird pricing. It's available right now. Go to TwinCitiesCon.com. There you can see Hayden Christensen, Stephanie Beatrice, Sting, Lou Diamond Phillips. Tim, do you like Star Wars at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely, of course.
You can go up, meet Hayden, see it, whether or not you're the part of the Anakin club. Do I like Anakin or not? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. He's redeemed himself to me.
Yeah. Didn't care for the prequels. I personally didn't care for the prequels, but I did like Ahsoka, and I thought he was really cool in that, and in some of the other things he's shown up with. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know what? We don't need Hayden at the moment. We can wait for Hayden in November. We got Tim Rayborn with us, author. We are talking about Northern mythology, tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi traditions. This massive book. How long did it take you to put all this together?
I knew a lot about the topic, but it was a lot of fine tuning the research and such. So probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 5-6 months, something like that. So
you're a machine.
Well,
you're a machine is what you are.
It's not that difficult once you get used to doing it. It's not that hard. So yeah.
I can barely write a 60-second commercial, and you're like, it's not hard. Anyone can do it. Well, you didn't say that.
I doubt I could write a commercial, to be honest. So
Well, either can I. So there's that as well. We a couple things we have going on here. I want to get some questions that are in the comments.
Sure.
Tim also is going to be reading excerpt. We have a couple,
Sure.
which those are great. So why don't we get to let's see, blah blah blah. Where are we here? How about Damien here? Damien says, "Have you ever wrote a book and few years later found new evidence that contradicts previous work, or is most your work so factual that it can't be misinterpreted?"
I mean, that's always. I've written any number of books. That's always, somebody's always going to find something out eventually. It happens occasionally. So you just go with it. You can only write what you know at the time. And this is. I come from a background of academic writing as well, like writing college level and academic level books for college libraries and such. And it always happens that some fact or a little bit of things is going to change later. So you can't help it. You just have to work with what you have now.
Well, and that's with the knowledge of knowing that you've exhausted what you could.
And the thing is that even if you do it, somebody's still, even if you are on a solid ground, there's always going to be somebody that disagrees with you. You just have to accept that's part and parcel of it. I don't agree with that interpretation. I think it was something else. So yeah, we put our best foot forward and leave it at that.
Well, and definitely the academic writing here, because I could see you have a bibliography here, which is nice to have. And I mean, I act like I never have written before, but it used to be one of my favorite things was to write papers for my, especially for my graduate degree program, because it's the idea of synthesizing a topic, right? That you are actually, that it's one thing to just take facts and put them out, but that's a list really at the end of the day, where synthesizing is you're taking the information and you're creating a new thought from it, which is what you're doing.
Yeah, I try. Yes. And, when you're dealing with topics as big as these, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the content in a minute or two, that, it's, as I said, it's invariable that you're going to have some interpretations that people don't agree with. So you just have to put that forward, and that's what you do. And that's what anything is. And then other people might write something that contradicts you, and it just goes back and forth. So, yeah.
I mean, when you're dealing with material that is so old, it's inevitable. And I mean, and it's funny because you could even say that about stuff that's now in like from the 50s or 60s. It's just how it is.
Look at people can interpret things that happened 2 years ago completely differently. So that's the nature of it. So when you're dealing with old myths and such, it's a wide open, and it's also part of the fun as well. It's like, well, okay, you think that, I think this. That's perfectly acceptable. So
have you ever had anybody who has after a book or even a paper or anything, a lecture or anything that's come up and given you a viewpoint that made you maybe not even sway, but just like, I need to look into that. I find that there's some value to that.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure there have been some things. Nothing really stands out in my mind, but that's certainly. And in this book, I make some certain assumptions and things that are, that's just my interpretation, but I know that some people may think differently. So that's all you can do. Is I'm not in any way claiming that a book like this is like the be all end all of compendiums. There's a ton of different Norse mythology books out there. I wanted to do something slightly different with this by also including traditions from Finland and the Sámi, who are the indigenous people of the far north of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, because there is some overlap between their myths, and that was really fun to sort of look into. You can see how there may, and I say might, have been influence. Not everybody believes there is, but there's a classic example of that as well. So it's possible that the Norse peoples, for instance, took some of the ideas and motifs of Sámi myth and welded them, kind of wove them into their own. We're not sure. There are some similarities, but it's not, we don't know. So it's one of those things that's kind of lost to history, but we can see little strands, little threads that might indicate there's some connections, since we know they had connections with each other.
What about the misconceptions with the Norse mythology?
Well, we've had kind of a resurgence in interest in Northern mythology and Norse mythology over the last 15 years. So I think the Vikings television show contributed to that, and various other shows and things. And there's been any number of things. A lot of them are pretty poorly anachronistic. Vikings itself, the TV show, is very non-historical. It's fun fantasy entertainment, but there's, other than referencing real life events, there's not much about it that's actually very accurate at all, sorry to say. So I think people have gotten some warped ideas about like Norse culture and such. And even the word Viking itself is, people use it like it was an ethnicity. No, it's a profession. It would be something akin to pirate or Seahawk or Raider. So if you substitute that word, you start seeing how it's kind of silly. We're talking about pirate mythology or pirate culture. It gets a little silly. It was a thing that certain groups of younger men did in the summer months to try to make names for themselves and to gain. But the vast majority of people living back in Scandinavia were farmers. They were carpenters. They were shipbuilders. They were whatever. They lived very dull, normal lives for people of that time. They raised animals. They grew crops. There was people. They weren't walking around like all of Scandinavia was a giant Frank Frazetta painting full of warriors and monsters and stuff. It's like there's this kind of weird warped sort of view about that, and the myths reflect that. A lot of people think that all the myths, because they definitely are bound up in a culture that does have a sort of warrior element to it. People, I think that all the myths are just like these heavy testosterone-laden battle stories with stuff, and there's actually not it at all. There's some really strange stuff, and there's really a lot of funny stories featuring women and non-binary people, and really humorous things and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think from the sort of warrior culture that popular belief is kind of ascribed to the Vikings over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So when I'm laying these out, I'm actually going through all of that. There's some really, really interesting stories that have nothing to do with that kind of thing at all. So it's quite surprising if you don't know anything about it.
Well, and it's really interesting too, the purpose a program like that serves, in the sense that they're not worried too much about getting the history right, but in the sense though that they're giving they're giving notice, and they're giving exposure to it, that now gets, there's going to be a certain amount of people who want to know what really is going on, which is nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, it certainly serves its purpose. Shows like that serve their purpose. But, one can hope that there will be more accurate, historical things come. I think the movie that came out last year, was it the Northman, is actually fantastic. And it's way more accurate in terms of clothing and mythology and all sorts of really good. If you've not seen it, it's well worth a watch. It's Alexander Skarsgård. It's a retelling of the Hamlet story, but from one of the ancient Icelandic sagas. So it's a similar kind of revenge story about this guy who seeks revenge for the murder of his father. And it's fantastic. But they did so much heavy detail work on the clothing and what the houses looked like and such, and it really brings things to life much more effectively. So I highly recommend that, because it has a lot of mythological elements in it as well. So it's great. Well,
and Chuck says in the comments, he says TV programming hit only the bullet points of history in most cases. And very much the truth, because they only want to get the stuff that's action. They don't care about 5 episodes about farming.
Right.
I would.
Yeah.
I might actually, but
I find that interesting. But a drama, about the life of a farmer throughout the Scandinavian year would actually be quite interesting. But that's me; I'm weird. So
exactly. Now, what I'd like to do, Tim, is I'd like to hear an excerpt, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I've got a few things. Let me. It's a kind of amusing. Let's see if I can find a fairly funny story. We often see if I can find this. Is this it? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll read you this. This one's not long, so I can put on my reading glasses here. I'll read you the excerpt from The Lay of Thrym, which is a story about Thor. And we all know Thor from the Marvel movies, but he was the god of thunder, among other things. And he's usually seen as the hothead with the big hammer and such. Well, this is a particularly kind of interesting story. Let me see if this is the right one. So this is where Thor actually has to dress up in drag to do something that he can't do by brute force. It's not something you would normally think would happen in a story about these mighty warriors. No. So one morning, Thor awoke to discover that his mighty hammer Mjolnir had gone missing. Distressed and angry, he went to Loki, who naturally denied having anything to do with it. Loki is the great trickster of Norse mythology. For once, Thor believed him. But that was not the reason he'd come to Loki. Instead, he knew that Loki's cunning was needed to help locate the hammer and help him to retrieve it. Loki was happy to help, though whether it was because he genuinely wanted to assist Thor or saw a way to yet make more mischief, who can say? The only question was who might have stolen it. Loki already had a plan. The two of them asked the goddess Freya if they could borrow her falcon cloak so that Loki might fly to Jotunheim, which is the land of the giants, and search for the hammer. Perhaps he already had a sense of who the culprit might be. Freya lent him her cloak, and he flew away to the land of the Jotnar, the giants. There he met the first Jotun, Thrym, sitting on a burial mound, making golden collars for his dogs and trimming his horses' manes. Loki greeted him and explained how Thor's hammer had gone missing. He asked if Thrym knew anything about the theft. Thrym smiled. Of course he knew all about it, for he was the one who had taken it. He had hidden it under a mountain and would never let it see the light of day again unless the gods agreed to send the goddess Freya to him as his bride. Loki flew back to the gods with this news and asked Freya to take up a wedding dress. Freya was furious, and all the gods trembled at her anger. Her necklace even snapped and fell from her neck, so enraged was she. She would not be bought by the likes of Thrym to become his plaything. She demanded that Loki solve this problem on his own. She would have no part in it. The gods met to discuss the problem, and the watchman Heimdall proposed a most unusual solution. They would indeed give Freya to Thrym, but not the Freya he was expecting. They would dress Thor himself in a wedding dress and veil, put Freya's necklace about his neck, and offer him up as a bride to the Frost Giant. Thor was not pleased with this plan, but Loki convinced him that it was the best way to sneak into Thrym's lair undetected. Loki even volunteered to dress as a bridesmaid and go with him. In disguise, the two made for Thrym's abode, where he welcomed them with a great feast. When Thrym saw how much Thor, hidden beneath a veil, ate, Loki explained that Freya had fasted for 8 days because of her desire to see Thrym. When Thrym asked why her eyes glowed under the veil, Loki soothed him by explaining it was because Freya had not slept for 8 nights and burned hot with desire for their wedding night. This was all Thrym needed to hear. Then his horrid sister appeared and asked for a bridal gift of gold from Freya. Thrym asked his servants to bring out Thor's hammer to sanctify the bride by laying it in her lap. He declared that he was more than ready to be married and to consummate their marriage. The Jotnar brought Mjolnir into Thrym's hall. At that moment, Thor whipped off the veil and told them he would relieve them of their treasure as he took up the hammer in his hands. The deceit was over. Thor had regained his weapon, and now Thrym and his cronies would deeply regret their theft. He slew Thrym first, and then all of the other Jotnar assembled, including the sister, who had greedily demanded gold, and instead received only a strike of Thor's hammer.
I love the imagery of how Thor was able to pass through and be like be able to pass. That's
the joke, is that he's like this big burly guy, and they just put a veil over his face and they buy it. And Loki, of course, is curious because Loki is a shapeshifter and can change into anything you want. So Loki literally becomes a woman in this case. And there are instances in the Edda where when Loki does shift from his normal human looking form to another creature, if he shifts to a woman, they change the pronouns to she pronouns after that in the old Icelandic and in the old Norse. So it's interesting that they start calling Loki, he's he, but then he becomes she, and then when he switches back, he becomes he again. So there's this whole weird kind of fluidity to Loki's character, which is quite shocking to some people. And we have discussions about transsexuality in the world are going on now these days, and it's controversy. But this is a very old thing, and Loki, who is one of the central figures, appears in more myths than almost any other god, and yet he fluidly shifts back and forth into many different forms and different genders. It's really fascinating. Again, it's not what people who are thinking this is a very hyper masculine warrior culture, which it could be, but there's also this other sort of things which are not what are expected.
It very much really puts the point on it by changing the pronouns quite a bit. And it's really interesting because there generally isn't going to be, there might be pictures of it or maybe not, but generally that's the way to kind of, if you will, paint the picture, to really describe it. And it's
exactly, that
really works out very well. Now, the only thing I'm missing in that is the Stan Lee cameo. Where is that in there?
He must have been at the table. He was one of the giants at the table. Yeah,
he probably was, or a night watchman somewhere in there.
Somebody bring out another cask of ale. The interesting thing, of course, is that the word Jotun or Jotnar often is translated as giant, but these beings were not necessarily giants in the sense of being 12 feet tall. It's kind of a mistranslation. They often were the same height as the gods, looked like gods. They could look perfectly human, or they could also look like misshapen monsters. Some of them were huge, but a lot of them look just like anybody else. So it's the Jotnar are a species, but they're not all giants in the sense of like Jack and the Beanstalk type giants. So yeah.
Oh, this is how interesting. This is really cool. Why don't we do this? Let's get in our second break here. When we come back, we're going to be doing another excerpt from the book, maybe even two if we have time. The book is called Northern Mythology, Tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions. Tim Rayborn's our guest. We'll be back. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Twin Cities Con returns to the Minneapolis Convention Center for their 4th year, November 8th through 10th. Twin Cities Con is a celebration of comics, toys, TV, film, art, cosplay, games, and all things nerdy. It's also a family-friendly event where you can meet your favorite celebrities, browse the vendor hall and artist alley for the coolest merch, watch celebrity Q&A, and even more. Twin Cities Con is bigger and better than ever before, with guests like Anakin Skywalker himself, Hayden Christensen, Stephanie Beatrice from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Encanto, WWE Hall of Fame wrestler Sting, and Lou Diamond Phillips. Plus, your favorite voice actors. 3 days of action-packed fun in the heart of Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Convention Center. Tickets start at $25. Kids tickets are just $8 for the entire weekend. VIP tickets also available, including some really cool VIP perks. Don't wait to get your tickets because early bird pricing is for a limited time. Buy your tickets and get more information at TwinCitiesCon.com. Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
This is Chad, owner of AM 950. Recently, I had a large order of custom designed t-shirts that needed to be turned around in a hurry. I knew exactly who to call. Grady Gear Company. Grady Gear Company is a local company that handles large and small custom clothing and apparel orders. I had a lot of questions from color, shirt quality, and what sizes we needed. Grady Gear Company was great to work with. They got us what we needed on time, and now everybody's looking great around the station in their new gear. Start your order at GradyGearCo.com.
We know you value buying local, especially when it comes to your magical supplies. So if you're looking for grimoires, decks, jewelry, candles, or herbs that are locally sourced, then come on down to Magus Books and Herbs. Curated for your ritual, ceremonial, spiritual, and spellwork needs, we've got all the tools to make your working extra. So make that prosperity ritual one that keeps on giving by visiting us at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis, or visit us online at magusbooks.com.
And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We're going to have on author Kathleen Martin, and she is actually the niece to Betty and Barney Hill. You may know the story of Betty and Barney Hill. They were abducted by aliens in 1961. And it was really one of the first cases to be really documented about an alien abduction. And Kathleen had been there basically from the start. She was 13 years old when that happened in 1961. She went on and had a big role in MUFON. She's had her own experiences. And tomorrow is going to be a conversation like no other. It's a very interesting story. She has a lot to say, and we're doing that tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to that. Please join us for that. We are having a tremendous conversation. We have Tim Rayborn with us. We've had him on a few times before talking about all sorts of cataclysms and stuff that could end society as we know it. But today we're talking about Northern mythology, tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi traditions. I am holding up this beautiful book that Tim was kind enough to send my direction. And, you know, let alone all the work that you put into this, all the work that your illustrator had put into this. My God.
Yeah.
Of course, every single page I'm doing has no pictures on it. But okay, here we go. See, I mean, that's just my luck. You know, I'm no Vanna White over here. So
I'd like to buy it all.
I'd like to buy a Clue, I think.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's such a beautiful book. It's available on Amazon. It just came out last week, so it's very cool. I'm just congratulations on this. This is really nice. Yeah.
Thank you. should be able to get it at most stores as well. If they're not carrying it, you can definitely order it at like Barnes & Noble or your local bookshops. And I always encourage people to do that, to support local bookstores, because it's easily available. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, your publisher is a big enough publisher. They're going to be all over the place. So
it's probably in quite a few places at this point. If not, ask for it by name.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. You know, by this point, with the number of books you've written, they'll should just have like one whole like bookcase with just your stuff in it, right?
A couple shelves at this point, yeah.
At least a couple shelves. How many books has it been? How many books?
I've also done co-authoring things and editing things. I think for my own, like things that I've written on my own, probably in the mid 40s now, upper 40s.
Yeah. I lost count.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's just like, wow, okay. No, that's fantastic. I mean, you got to wonder how many words that is.
A lot.
The official number is a lot.
A lot, yeah. More than a few.
more than I could ever say in my lifetime.
Yeah.
What is it? Is there like, I mean, I'm sure all of this. Okay, real fast. A good question, actually. Damien wants to know, would this be released in the UK?
It should be. I think it might even be. If not now, it probably will be in the autumn. Probably. The original release date was supposed to be October, both here and the UK, and they moved the release date in the US up to August for various reasons. It might still be October in the UK, but if you wanted to look up like if you go to like Waterstones.com, which is one of their big sellers there, you should be able, or Amazon UK, they'll be able to tell you. But yes, it absolutely will be available there, definitely.
I know that like shipping, like you want to get it released in the country it's coming from, because shipping is too ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll have copies available in stores there. Absolutely. So
I just looked today because you spent a great deal of time in the UK. There's a new book that someone had put out there of all the comics from the series Dad's Army.
Oh, right.
And I'm a huge Dad's Army fan.
It's a fun show. Yeah.
So like, this has to be in my collection. The book, the pre-order for the book is £25. The shipping to US is £29.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, and it didn't used to be that way. It's gotten a lot. I used to buy a lot of stuff from Amazon UK, and the shipping has just gotten prohibitive in the last 7, 8, 9 years. So yeah.
Pretty ridiculous. Now, I know that your answer is going to be all of it, but was there anything in the book that you you just not only loved putting in the book, like really just a highlight, but you like to go back and reread because it just makes you happy, or you're just really proud of what you found out about it, or anything like that?
Sure. I pretty much never reread anything I've done once it's out. Once it's been proofread and edited, I don't go back, because invariably I will find a typo and it will annoy me. So, but no, I mean, I did enjoy working on all of it. It was fun for me because I know more about the Norse myths, and but I found the Finnish and the Sámi stuff quite fascinating as well. It's like they're adjacent cultures. In Finland, the language of Finland is completely different. It's not a Scandinavian or Germanic language. It's related to a completely different language family, and it has nothing to do with the Germanic languages of like Norwegian, Swedish, and such. It's the Finno-Ugaric. I think it's more like Hungarian. It's related to that sort of line of things. Finnish and modern Estonian are part of that, and it's a very, very different. It's Indo-European, but only just barely. It may not even be. It may actually derive from somewhere in Central Asia, I don't recall. But the myths are different as well. They have a very different feel to them. So I really enjoyed writing the Finnish section, and also the Sámi, as I said, who are the indigenous people of northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, who have lived there for thousands of years, and delving into their beliefs, which are still a part of their culture in many ways. Some of them, there's been a resurgence in belief in Sámi belief and traditional beliefs, which is great to see. It's given them a kind of a national identity of their own. So yeah, I've really enjoyed both of those.
It's interesting when you say all that, and just the kind of the thought of how we think, the general we think that we're permanent, that like all those changes, that's all years ago. That's just what happened. And hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but we're permanent now. We're not going to change.
Yeah.
And you think about too, like all of just let alone the world, but like look at Europe, and then the changes of country names and whatnot in the 90s, and even in the early 2000s. It's like nothing stays the same. Things change around. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So yeah, we always think that we're permanent, but we're not. So yeah,
I mean, there could be a day that there is a version of Tim Rayborn in 300 years from now writing books about stuff that that we are living now, and that because to your point too, it's amazing, even with like internet and the way that we live our lives, that almost everything's documented, doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to be there when we're years down the road. I mean, how many times do you look at something, or even people talk about something, they get it wrong, even though it should be there. I don't know. I just find it very interesting.
Yeah. And I think there is a resurgence among a lot of people to sort of re-embrace some of these older customs and traditions and beliefs as a way of sort of I think a lot of people feel very disconnected, and I think that these we're seeing like a resurgence of sort of indigenous people's rights and such in the world, because they do have things to teach us that, you know, we've become a little bit disconnected. And I think there is that. So looking at these old religions, old traditions and such, and seeing what value they can bring to cultures now, even you know, ever it seems like they might be obsolete and irrelevant, but they're not at all. Their stories are incredibly strong and have a lot of things still to teach. As I said, the myth never happened, but is always happening. It's always relevant, and that's important.
Well, even what you just read with the humor, you know, I think of all that stuff, and I think, oh, it's all just going to be, you know, pontificating or just trying to, you know, you'll just try to teach us. But that is a truly humorous and wonderful piece there.
You could imagine the storyteller sort of like really getting into it and acting out the parts and pretending to be Thor, pretending to be a woman and talking like this, you know, or something, and getting words of laughter from people too. So
and people love it, and they're telling all their friends about it, and absolutely, it's wonderful. Damien has a question. He said, did Ragnar Lothbrok really die in a snake pit?
We don't actually know if Ragnar actually lived. It's possible. He appears in one of the sagas, and he may be a historical person, and there is that story. We don't know. The answer is that he might have been a historical person. He might have died in a snake pit. He might not. There's some evidence that he did exist and that his kids were real people, but there's also no definitive proof. So the answer is maybe.
I love it. And I love the questions tonight. I love the way that everyone knows. Now we have about 5 minutes or so left. Do you have one more to read that could fit in?
Not in that short a time. No, they're a little bit longer than that, so probably not. But I'm happy to talk about anything else you'd like to talk about.
Just read fast. I mean, I don't know.
And go. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
I can talk a little bit about one of my favorite characters is the Finnish character of Väinämöinen, and I'll read just a little bit about him. He is he's the main hero of the Kalevala, which is the great Finnish epic. And he was the inspiration for a lot of interesting other characters. We don't really know if he's a god or not. It depends on what text you're reading. In the Kalevala, he's not a god, but rather an intermediary between the realms of the gods and the spirits of humanity. But later on, he was actually revered as a god as well. He might have been a historical holy man, shaman, something like that. We're not sure. But he was a wizard, a leader, an adventurer, a master singer, a musician, and a sage. The legend said he was already born an already old man and had lived for what. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien was fascinated with Finland and Finnish mythology and its language. The language was actually the basis for his Elvish language, Quenya, which was the higher Elvish. Lower Elvish, Stendarren, was based on Welsh, just so you know. And Väinämöinen was absolutely one of his models for Gandalf, as well as possibly Treebeard and Tom Bombadil, the guy of this ancient figure who's almost one with the land and one with the forest. So, yeah, Väinämöinen is, he's a master musician, but he's not always a good guy. He can be a little bit egotistical, uncaring, quick to anger, prone to making mistakes. And some people see a relation between Väinämöinen and Odin, the great one-eyed god of Norse mythology, who was likewise a god of poetry and magic and was also capable of making some really terrible decisions. So Väinämöinen appears throughout the Kalevala, and it's kind of the ups and downs of his adventures of this old man who goes on these crazy wild adventures, sailing in ships, fighting sea monsters, charming animals, and trying to seduce young maidens, and usually failing spectacularly and in humorous ways. So again, it's a very human kind of story, but he's there's a picture of him here you can see in the book. He plays a harp made out of a fish jawbone, and he's one of the great sages and musicians of Finnish myth.
Could you hold that up again? Sure. For the people watching, I'll just make it full screen there. So that's just beautiful.
Beautiful artwork. And his first harp was made out of a jawbone from a giant fish, and then the second one was made out of wood, and the type of instrument is still popular as a folk instrument in Finland today. So a tremendous amount of influence on Finnish culture and such. And again, there's been a resurgence of interest that coincided with Finnish nationalism in the 19th century to sort of reassert themselves and throw off sort of Scandinavian cultural influence and reclaim the Finnish language and their own myths and heritage. So
it is so fascinating, and it's just like, I kind of put myself in the place of this stuff being like contemporary in the sense, like, just imagine how we get excited about people like fictitious characters or whatever, and that's what they were doing back then.
Absolutely. It's like we get it. Yeah. Imagine that. I mean, because you didn't have any other entertainment. So you might gather in the great longhouse or the great communal thing, and by the fire, you would, drink your mead and other things and listen to a storyteller or a singer telling these things. It'd be like one-man performances, and the audience would have been absolutely captivated. We think the great poem Beowulf was probably performed that way in the Anglo-Saxon mead halls in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries as well. So yeah, absolutely. We've lost most of those, but that's one of the ones that actually survives. And it might have been told over several evenings. So it would have been like, tune in tomorrow night for the next adventure,
How interesting. I think about too, like, just how people would wait for like William Shakespeare to come up with it. And absolutely. I know that's not necessarily historically accurate, but just even something like Upstart Crow.
Yeah, I love that. I love that show. Absolutely.
I love that show too. And it's a great way of like the expectation for his next work. I'm sure it was very similar.
Yeah.
With, like, the expectation of the next story.
Yeah. The Norse had a class of poets called skalds, which actually were in the employ of kings and other people, and they told stories. And some of the skaldic poetry actually does survive in oral tradition and was written down in the Edda, and that's where we have some of these stories from. So yeah, and they would be stories about gods and myths and heroes and such. So yeah, absolutely.
God, that's so fascinating, so great. And you got to wonder, eventually, like, based on one of your other books talking about how civilization ends, if it does, or if it gets sidetracked, all the stuff that we know is going to either be lost or it's going to be hidden or whatever.
Right.
Wonder what stories we're experiencing now that could eventually be myth or
right. Yeah. Will Star Wars or Star Trek become like religions eventually? And myths, is that possible? It's an interesting concept. Who knows? Lord of the Rings. Tolkien actually wrote the Lord of the Rings. One of his reasons for doing it was because he felt that England had lost so many of its Anglo-Saxon myths that he wanted to kind of create a new set of English myths, to replace those. And that, he succeeded beyond his wildest imaginations as far as that goes. So yeah,
absolutely. The book is called Northern Mythology: Tales from Norse, Finnish, and Sámi Traditions. Tim Rayborn, thank you so very much. What a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much. I always love being here.
Go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, pick it up. We'll be back tomorrow with Kathleen Martin. Everyone, take care.